Hello and welcome to another episode of the DigiTeacher. It's been a couple of months since the last episode. Real life, I'm afraid, got in the way. Anyway, but here I am again. And what I'd like to talk about this week is something that has been increasingly occupying my mind, and that is what's happening with AI. And I know this is going to be a fairly hot topic. So just from personal experience, I'm an English teacher, and what's been happening is every time that we assess something, you notice a very large degree of flattening. So what do I mean by that? Well, normally, if let's say we've been studying Macbeth and we do a test in class and students have to answer questions about Macbeth and they've got to write it on a piece of paper under controlled conditions in a classroom. What you tend to have then is quite a wide range of responses. So some students are going to answer fairly eloquently, in complete sentences that make sense with logical arguments, and that's your A student. They're going to make a few mistakes, of course, but very largely their writing is going to be very coherent and very thought out responses indicating quite a lot of critical thinking. And then you're going to get other responses, some of which are barely literate. So the sentences, you're going to battle to understand what the student is actually saying, and when you do uncover what they're saying, it's fairly trivial. Very often they just tell the plot. They're unable to unpack main ideas, themes, speak to character, anything like that. So you get a kind of normal range, and that's what you expect in a classroom. But the other day, for example, they'd been doing holiday reading and they had to do a presentation on the novel that they'd read. And the brief was a short 2-minute presentation. They could use PowerPoint, they could use images to support what they were saying, and they were only allowed a single cue card. The whole idea was to try and get around ChatGPT. So if you're bringing just a cue card and you're discussing, you're not reading a speech or anything like that, that should really minimize ChatGPT, right? Well, what I found was an almost inability to tell the difference between your A student and your student who's just passing. Every single speech sounded exactly the same. It was structured in the same way. It had a hook. It was well put together, basically. Very, not stunning, not really insightful or anything. But every single presentation was more than competent. And the students, they had a cue card. Very few little readings. So some students did read from their cue cards quite suspiciously. But generally speaking, they were using them as if they were using keywords. But you could hear the speech that had been written underneath it. And it was very much a flat, generic, highly competent, but the audience was more like a marketing campaign. Bill Smith has a problem, and being a vampire wasn't one of them, kind of thing, and that was their presentation. This followed very similar approaches, very little innovation and very little voice. I struggled to hear different students' voices. I didn't hear the competent student's voice, and I didn't hear the student who's really struggling to put something together. So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, I went through my LinkedIn today and just scrolling through some random posts. A lot of it was teachers talking about AI and being concerned about AI. So someone posted this image, and the meaning I get out of it is that for assessment purposes, certainly AI is seen as a great threat. One of the main purposes of assessment is to be able to give students feedback. And if what students are doing is using AI to write their pieces of writing, creative writing or whatever, essays, for speeches and presentations, for homework, then what's the point? that rather pessimistic view of the use of AI, I think can be counterbalanced by a more optimistic view. And the case for that is if teachers were to design tasks for students in a more thoughtful way, then you could kind of get around that. Students are always going to try and use labor-saving devices like AI, farming their cognition off onto machines. But if teachers design the tasks in such a way that AI cannot do the task, then we can stay one step ahead of the game. I think sadly that's not really practicable. So there may well be successes, so you may be able to do this in a few instances, but ultimately students are always going to be one step ahead. The thief is always one step ahead of law, if you like. But I suppose maybe if there were massive gains to be made from using AI in education for learning purposes, then we could say, okay, well, maybe assessment has to go. Maybe we don't need to do formal assessments at all. And that's something we have to give up in the name of progress. But I'm not so sure that that's the case. So some research has started to come out which has suggested, for example, that the use of AI chatbots as tutors, which I think is one of the most promising, the more promising avenues for the use of AI. For example, in personalizing learning, if someone is working one-on-one with a chatbot and the chatbot is helping to scaffold their learning, helping to allow them to make progress, then that's clearly something that could be really, really good. But the research around that is a little bit alarming, so let's have a look at that quickly. So this graph summarizes what quite a lot of the early research about the intervention of AI as a tutor. So this is like a chatbot that's used to help students scaffold their learning ahead of an assessment, for example. And in one study I saw for mathematics, for example, ahead of a test, those students who used the AI chatbot as a tutor showed a much improved performance above a control group that hadn't had that intervention or had had more traditional means for preparing for the test. But over the longer term, that group seemed not to have retention of that information, whereas those who learnt more traditionally retained it much, much better and soon overtook the AI group in performance. That's bad news for AI chatbots as kind of mentors and tutors. But, maybe there are uses. Maybe those difficulties can be overcome with better scaffolding, better prompts, better use of the AI tutors, maybe over a more prolonged period, maybe just with an emphasis rather than on enhancing performance in a particular test or assessment, going for more long-term growth or what have you. I don't know. I think the jury is way out, and I think that's the point. We're at a stage where I don't think anybody is certain, anybody knows how to use AI in education for long-term benefit. And I think that's a very dangerous situation because teachers are being pressured to use it. Teachers are being pressured to deal with the situation where students are using it, and we don't have adequate responses in place. So should we then just ban it? Maybe the best result is you just absolutely ban it. You find ways of assessing and ways of learning where the use of chatbots would be absolutely impossible. And we say, well, when the research is better, when we understand better what it is that we need to do as teachers, then we might start playing with it. Well, I think there's some things to be said for that. I think it's really good to be cautious. When you're dealing with young developing minds, you don't want to make mistakes, and you want to be very conservative in approach. But we're not going to learn anything unless teachers are playing with it and teachers are experimenting with it. So I think we need to almost kind of sandbox particular effort. So we need to say, okay, we're going to be very traditional in approach for most of the time, but we are going to spend some time looking at AI tutors, looking at how students might be better prepared to use prompt engineering, for example, to get better results, and maybe trying to work towards a situation where the tasks that we set students are deliberately around their use of AI chatbots, and or maybe assessing those chatbots, trying to work out whether the chatbot has done a good job or not. I don't know. I think it's a really open question at the moment, and one that's going to need a bit of time to figure out. So the techno-optimist in me is always saying, yeah, but if you don't play with it, if you don't try it, if you don't experiment with it, you're not going to find out. The techno-pessimist kind of looks at it and says, well, look what happened with cell phones. Cell phones were going to help students learn in class, and now most schools are banning them because they are so disruptive. Students will, if given half a chance, will sit on their phones the whole time, and it's really difficult to get them off the phones to do any decent learning. And the benefits to be gained from it are not as substantial. So maybe the same as with AI, and ultimately we're going to be saying no, ban it at the end. But I think we kind of need to go through a period of experimenting with it and trying to find out what works and what doesn't work, because there might be little nuggets, little things that we can uncover. We're not really going to be able to research its effectiveness without teachers doing that in different spaces, in different contexts, trying out different things. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents worth. What do you think? If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and please leave comments. I'd love to have conversations flowing from this video. Bye for now, and see you in the next episode.